the Stoic Perk deck, a perk deck that was released alongside the character Duke. This perk deck is kind of like a reverse anarchist in composition, so let's take a look at what it has to offer. As with all the other perk decks, every other skill of it is shared, so I will not be going over these, but let's take a look at what it does have. Virtue. Unlocks and equips the Stoic Hip Flask. Damage taken is now reduced by 75%. The remaining damage will be applied directly. The 75% reduced damage will be applied over time, instead 16 seconds. You can use the throwable key to activate the Stoic Hip Flask and immediately negate any pending damage. The flask has a 10-second cooldown, but time remaining will be lessened by 1 second per enemy killed. Unmoved. All of your armor is converted and applied to your health. Calm. After not taking damage for 4 seconds, any damage over time you're still waiting to receive will be negated. Imperturbable. When your health is below 35%, the cooldown of your flask will be reduced by 2 seconds for each enemy you kill instead of 1. Enduring. When your damage over time is removed, you will be healed for an additional 50% of the damage over time remaining at that point. Alright, so let's just start by saying, holy crap, this is a really strong perk deck. So in an overly simplified nutshell, what it does is it takes away all of your armor and it gives it to your health instead. Kind of like the reverse of anarchist, like I said earlier. Instead of taking damage normally, the damage you take will be spread over time. But if you can avoid getting hit again after taking damage for 4 seconds, you'll stop taking damage over time, and you'll actually gain some of that health back. The health tick down is very generous since you're getting a lot of damage reduction, so even on 1 down, you'll survive much more than you normally would as long as you can find cover pretty fast. The flask you get just stops the tick down if you use it while you're getting hurt. That's really it. It's a very short cooldown, and it cools down even faster if you get a few kills with it. So basically you can use it at any time. Either wait until you really need it, or you can just spam it as often as you get it. So in a nutshell, that's really it. And I'm not going to focus on all the nitty-gritty details like the exact numbers and stuff. It's much easier just to get a feel of it if you use it in gameplay. But by God, it's really good on 1 down. So for today, I tested the perk deck with a bunch of different builds, and it actually works pretty well for both dodge and armor users. So both the suit and ICTV are pretty viable. I'll leave a link down in the description for the builds that I use, and please, for the love of God, read the description. So despite the fact that the build can work with both of the major playstyles, it'll still mostly feel like the same setup, so I'll just go over how the general perk deck works, and then we can kind of get into more detailed talk later. This perk deck will feel very similar to Ex-Presidents if you've ever used that. It's another free perk deck that gives the user health when your armor breaks and begins to regenerate. So the idea for Stoic is kind of the same, you know? If you get hurt, you take cover and you'll get some of the health back. However, Stoic, unlike Ex-Presidents or any of the other perk decks that relies on conditionals such as killing enemies or meleeing them or something along those lines, you don't really need to do anything except just your natural instinct of taking cover as soon as you get hurt. I feel like this already makes the perk deck a lot easier to use than some of the new ones we've been getting like Kingpin and Sicario, where you kind of almost have to predict when you're going to take damage and how much you're going to take and stuff like that. With this perk deck, it plays a lot more naturally. You know, you don't need to worry about it, and it makes it a lot more intuitive because the gameplay is much more of a regular armor or dodge setup. And also, unlike the previously mentioned perk decks where almost the entirety of its usefulness is revolved around the deployable that it gives, so with the Kingpin it's the injector, with Sicario it's the smoke. With Stoic, the flask isn't something that's necessary to the function of the perk deck itself, it's more like it's just a really nice supplement to it. And because of that, it just makes the perk deck a lot more useful in situations where you don't have the flask and you're not really stupidly reliant on it to live. Of course, it still takes away your grenade slot, so dealing with stuff like Captain Winters is a lot more difficult now, but hey, you take what you get, I suppose. So the general feel of the perk deck is already much nicer than most of the other ones that we have that aren't the basic ones, like armor or dodge. So let's talk a little bit about the usefulness of it. The damage reduction is amazing, and combined with the damage over time, it's probably just one of the best perk decks for 1 down. Simply for the fact that no matter how careful you are in 1 down, you can easily die from anywhere at any time with nearly any build. You know, with this perk deck, even if you take enough damage to be killed, you won't die instantly, and instead your life is prolonged by the damage over time tick. Combined with the damage reduction while the die is happening, you'll rarely die outright, which gives you so many options to save yourself. I mean, the perk deck itself has countermeasures to stop you from dying, either waiting 4 seconds or drinking from the flask, but even then, if you do know that you're about to die, you can med up beforehand. You can put down a first aid kit, take a med from a med bag, or just run to a safe spot and die in peace. It takes away the frustration that is dying immediately on one down to an enemy that's a mile away sitting in a bush that you couldn't even see. You're honestly stupidly tanky with this perk deck. It almost feels like an Anarchist Frenzy setup, but with its own sustainability and health regen. With the Flask, it's like having a mini swan song while alive. You can basically take enough damage to die, but just wait until the damage tick gets close to killing you, then activate your Flask to get all your health back. And it's kind of like a second life. You know, the more I talk about the perk deck, the less I have to say about how it affects the dodge and armor build differently, you know? I mean, for the most part, everything here applies to both. The only difference being, if you go for the armor setup, you'll wear ICTV, and you'll have 450 health. While with the dodge setup, you'll only get 250 health, plus the potential 15 dodge if you so choose to get the skills with it. And due to the way the perk deck works, having higher health means you'll have a lot more leeway in taking damage, but of course at the cost of speed and dodge. It's all very straightforward, I won't go over that too much. The higher health aspect is definitely affected by skills as well. For example, having a Joker setup with Partners in Crime Ace gives you an extra 30% health on top of your already massive health pool. So I'm using that right now for the armor setup, and it feels absolutely amazing. Of course, as long as I have 2 Jokers alive, or even 1. I didn't have the points to get it for the dodge build, but it would still definitely be worthwhile if that's something you want to pick up. Now, so far, everything about this perk deck is amazing, but there are a few things that I should mention that ground it back to reality. First of all, because you have literally 0 armor, not just like 1, 0, most of the armor skills are useless. Things like Bullseye, Shock and Awe, Second Wind. Basically, anything dealing with armor proc and regen won't be used by the setup. Increasing the armor value still helps, so Iron Man and, well, I guess to a lesser extent that one skill that increases the ballistic vest armor. But yeah, increasing the armor value will convert all the armor into health, so that is still pretty useful. And speaking of skills, there are a few other pretty common skills that are kinda made useless with the setup for 1 down difficulty. Most notably, a Berserker Frenzy setup from Fugitive is nigh impossible to use for 1 down. It takes away so much of your health that basically 1 shot from any enemy will probably kill you. And even that's with the damage reduction from the perk deck and the Frenzy skill. It's just really not worth it to try and use since you're already really tanky enough without that setup. But, you know, tankiness aside, that also does mean that armor setups lose out on the extra damage from Berserker, which, well, for me, it gave me a much harder time being an efficient killing machine on 1 down. I struggled a bit trying to use normal weapons without Berserker, so you're definitely a lot more limited with your weapon use, and maybe your skill use as well. Another skill that, well, it's not really bad so much, but, you know, it's just harder to use with a Stoic Perk deck, is Swan Song. You know, Swan Song is a very common skill to bring for 1 down, but it's much harder to proc with Stoic since if you die from the dot damage, it won't actually activate Swan Song. To activate Swan Song, you have to die from enemy fire, not dot damage. That's already something that's in the game since, you know, you can't proc Swan Song with fire dot damage or gas dot damage, and you can't do it from fall damage either, so I'm sure there's a few other things, but that's really all I got from the top of my head. So, you can still activate Swan Song with Stoic, but it's really hard to know whether you're going to die from enemy gunfire or just the dot damage itself. You know, it's kind of like a 50-50 chance, and it really makes it unreliable to use. Again, not the worst thing in the world since, you know, you're already really tanky and you've got somewhat of a pseudo Swan Song while alive, but it's still something worth mentioning since Swan Song is a very common skill to take for 1 down. Also, another big downside to this perk deck is that it relies on having a health buffer at all times to be effective. You know, this is why the Berserker Frenzy setups suck. And it also makes working with low health very difficult. Something that is extremely common after dying once in any of the harder difficulties, Mayhem, Death Wish, 1 down. Much like Ex-President, you have a hard time gaining health back when you have so little to work with, so you're very prone to dying if you've just recently been revived. And with the Stoic Perk deck in particular, it's pretty rare to gain more health than what you started with. So if you're at low health, it's very, very hard to gain health back relying on the perk deck alone. For that reason, things like first aid kits are an amazing asset to bring along, something I brought along for my dodge setup. Or you could also go with the hostage taker route from Mastermind, which gives you health over time for having jokers. And that's what I have with my armor setup, since I'm already using jokers. But yeah, in general, the perk deck just suffers from having low health, and any players that like to make the most out of those kinds of setups and playstyles, they might have a hard time adjusting. Overall, that's really it though. There's not too many downsides to the perk deck, and to be honest, most of them don't even have any major bearing on its overall effectiveness. I mean, this is the perk deck that allows, like, a suit dodge user to be able to stand up to a dozer or a sniper, basically take a shot and live to tell the tale. Or it also gives tanky armor users the ability to feel like a tank on 1 down difficulty. So I'd recommend giving it a try yourself and just seeing how much you can get away with. I've literally just stood in front of bulldozers no problem with both setups, just to try it out, you know, with the suit and the armor. So the only other real thing I can think of that scares me with this perk deck is tasers. Now tasers, they stop you from being able to run away and, you know, find cover, stop the damage tick. But even worse than that is they stop you from having the ability to activate your flask, meaning you can't automatically regenerate all the damage you're taking. You know, normally you can kind of go on suicide runs and just take enough damage to die, but then wait for the last second to activate your flask, giving you essentially a second life. This is perfect for running out in the open to do objectives and such, but if a taser manages to get you, there's no way to activate the flask, meaning you're as good as dead. So that's really all I got to say about the perk deck. It's very strong, and well, I don't know the extent of that, but well, I guess we'll see with more playing around. And yeah.